Welcome to Chinchilla Squeaks. Yes, I have finally changed the name from the Weekly Squeak because it wasn't really weekly anymore. In fact, this week I have 3. So, yeah, I needed a more generic name. My guests today on this interview are, ignore the title, it's slightly wrong, Adrien and Amanda from Streamlit. Have I pronounced that correctly to begin with? Streamlit?
Yeah, yep. Perfectly.
So what is Streamlit? The website is very, very bold and nice big fonts, unless I inadvertently zoomed in and forgot about it. And there's lots of nice graphics showing me what I can do. But let's have a kind of one sentence summary. What is Streamlit?
Yeah, Streamlit lets analytic professionals, data scientists, machine learning engineers, business analysts create interactive apps that let them and share them throughout their organization. So lets them basically take the work that they're doing, which is often some of the highest value work in the company, and mixtures of data, of machine learning models, of predictions about the future, geographic data, and gives them a sort of superpower to wrap that into an experience that then can be used by business analysts and salespeople and so on without having to ask permission from anyone else.
And this, actually an immediate thing that jumps out as me is something like data journalism as well. Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think that's a great analogy. And one of the really cool things about Streamlit is that it's only 2 years old. But it's had a remarkable sort of double resonance, which is really exciting. So on the one hand, it's used at huge companies like Uber as part of their data science platform and 7-Eleven, and there's all kinds of interesting use cases for this sort of next generation of AI-enabled apps that are sort of helping to run a company. And on the other hand, there's a huge open source community of people creating COVID trackers and face generators and exploring, the Star Wars universe with machine learning, and they're just publishing these apps in Streamlit. And so it's super energizing as a company to be able to straddle these two worlds, and obviously it's exciting for us to be able to build technology that has that kind of, cross-cutting impact.
Let's go back a step for a minute. I always kind of like to ask this first before we dig into details. What prompted you to want to create the company together in the first place? What problem were you trying to solve? Where were you before? What were you fed up with using, et cetera, et cetera?
I'll first say that there's actually a third co-founder, Tiago.
Okay.
So there's actually 3 of us who started the company together. And Amanda, do you want to tell our origin story?
Well, I think, there's multiple stages of the origin story, but all of us 3 co-founders, we met at Google X, almost a decade ago. So Adrien had been pulled out of Carnegie Mellon, and we all kind of ran this NLP project together. And when that wound down, we all kind of looked at each other and we were like, we want to do this again, right? It was fun working with each other. It was fun building a company. And so we all kind of went our separate ways. Adrien and I actually both went to Zoox, which is a self-driving car company. And when Adrien left, he started kind of tinkering on the side. And I think one of the reasons I think Streamlit resonates so well today is because Adrien, as a machine learning engineer and professional, was trying to build a tool that he wanted, right? These were problems that we saw when we were at Google X and Zoox, which was just, you had this data, you had this model, you wanted to put it in some way where you could send it to someone and say, look at this thing that I'm doing, right? What do you think about it, right? Or even, put it in a context where they could use it, right, as a tool. And that's, Adrien was prototyping it and he showed it to Tiago, and Tiago was like, oh, I get this. This is interesting. And Tiago jumped on board. And then they showed it to me and I was like, I don't get it. And they had to come back to me twice. I was also pregnant at the time and wasn't.
It's our MBA,
Yeah, I am. A business person. But finally, kind of when they showed it to me for the thing, I really got it because as working as a product manager, an operations professional, right? I was like, oh, this enables me as someone who doesn't code, right, on a day-to-day basis to actively interact with the data and the models. And that's extremely powerful because that's going to help me, do my job better. And this is going to help a lot of people. And so
I'd actually like to go into that a little bit more though with you, Amanda, because everywhere on the website, I see Python, I see code. But you say you can interact with things as well. So is there another side here that I'm not seeing from the homepage? Or is it just that the code is pretty simple and you could anyone, quote unquote, could change it.
Well, I think that is definitely true, right? So I am definitely not, a Python professional, but I've learned Python enough, and Streamlit is so easy that I can use it, right, with kind of a couple of tutorials. So we have hackathons every couple of months, and I actively, hack in Streamlit. But what I was referring to more is the fact that, if Adrien and I were coworkers, right, and he's the one working on a model, but I'm the one who needs to, take that recommendation system and then present those recommendations to customers, right? We can work together. I can say, this is what I need, right? Adrien can say, oh, I have a model that fits that. And now he can make an app that I can then use in my day-to-day, marketing or sales or, whatever role that I'm using, and actually take that kind of, AI data, whatever it was, and drive those insights into the business.
And as far as I can see, you do have things like widgets. So if someone defines a variable somehow, then the consumer can play with that widget to change the values at least. So if you construct the Streamlit in the right way, you don't have to be a developer to experiment, I suppose.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
100%.
Okay. And are these all embeddable on third-party sites and things like that?
So we are seeing that happen more and more. So, for example, University of Pennsylvania created a sort of really important viral tracker, like nationally in Streamlit, that was iframed into their site.
Okay.
And increasingly, we're seeing a totally unexpected. When we built Streamlit, it was for the purpose of, we thought, internal tooling at companies, and that was the problem we set out to solve. But it has turned out that the project has resonated far beyond that, and I really think it's just because of this sort of very, very developer centric, like super ease of use and fun. We always make everything kind of fun and a little bit whimsical, and so all of a sudden we're seeing totally new use cases crop up, which is really exciting. It's like the sort of best case scenario and also very distracting, especially when, you can go to Silicon Valley and raise a lot of money because you can sort of get totally lost in this. One of the new use cases that's really cropped up majorly is people building Streamlit apps for their customers. So they actually want it to be externally facing and they want to embed it in something else. So people are sort of hacking around this and making it work. And actually one of the really interesting questions for us as a company is, okay, so is this supported use case, and from a business perspective, and also from a feature perspective, and everything else. So that's something that's cropping up. But our core use case is you click a button and you get this URL, and then that URL is shareable, and that's a sort of atomic unit in and of itself. And
that's this this new Streamlit sharing feature.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So that's how we allow developers to deploy their apps, and that's kind of the bridge between the open source sort of virally popular app creation framework in Python, and then the sort of enterprise product that we're selling.
So actually, there's two bits there I would kind of like to pull together. Let's stay with the sharing and then go back. Because one thing you mentioned on the sharing is a sort of combination or an integration, however you want to call it, with GitHub. How does that work? And this is my audience is fairly developer heavy, so we can go into detail about what that means, no problems. But how does that connect?
Yeah. So I'll let perhaps you take this from the user perspective, but I'll give the developer perspective really quickly, which is we had this super cool idea, and then it turns out that everyone had it at the same time. So the way to think about it is exactly like Vercel or Netlify, which is you just put your code in GitHub. From your perspective, it just feels like you're checking code into a repo. You're not doing anything else. Just putting code in repo, and then magically this website appears. Why is that such a good idea? Well, for one thing, GitHub and really Git is this incredible language for collaboration. It's like that, in some sense, like civilizationally, like the best collaboration platform ever invented. You can see, and just fork things and comment on other people's things, and then very controlled way bring them all together. And I think it's one of the major reasons software engineering has continued to scale in terms of the size of the projects that are possible. And so we bring that we give you all that power. But it feels just like putting code into a repository, but suddenly you get this app, and the app can be branched, the app can be versioned, all this cool stuff.
So you use the Python plus the Streamlit additions, you hook it up somehow with a GitHub app, for example, and then once you merge or push to a certain branch, you get a link generated that you can
100%. Yeah. And if you push a new version, you don't even get a new link. The web page just reloads, and then all of a sudden the new app's there. So it's super, it's all about, we want to have the data scientist, let's say, the machine learning engineer, really learn nothing else, almost. Just use only tools they already know. And yet suddenly they have this superpower that before you had to hire a team to do it, or hire contractors, or learn all this crazy new technology. And so that's super empowering. And I feel like this was a community that was hungering for this tool. And I think we just came in at the right time and provided it. So that's kind of explains the resonance.
So give me your side, Amanda, because then I have a follow-up question where I feel like there's an obvious question to ask at this point, but let's stay a little bit more on this sharing feature.
So, for us, really, we want you to be able to make and deploy an app within an afternoon. And so kind of everything we do at Streamlit, people have said, we think things through maybe too much in terms of how, we want things really elegant and beautiful. But we're trying to take everything that's kind of, frustrating about the flow and make it into one button click, right? Or one function call. And that's really kind of the core of Streamlit. And so when we were developing sharing, when we first launched the open source project, the number one thing people said was great, I've made this fantastic app and it lives on my computer, right? And people started spinning up all these guides of, here's how, you Dockerify it or how you put in Heroku. But I was in a meeting yesterday with a rather large company who is still basically what I do is it's on my, local host. And then, if somebody needs access, I basically poke a hole, right? And kind of let them do that while it's running on my laptop, And it's because it's a different skill set, right? It's a DevOps skill set. And so, we wanted to make sure from the developer side, right, yes, that they could have that one click. But then also, right, because this is going out to so many of the non-technical users, right? I remember I was talking to this hedge fund, and they're like, my hedge fund managers can't manage anything beyond basically URLs and email, right? I can't say, go to this tool and log in and do that. I have to be able to send a link and say, hey, adjust
Docs
this slide
or something like that, which
exactly,
is
right. And so it makes it really, really easy to share when you just have to point people to a URL and say, go explore the data yourself.
Mm-hmm. And actually now I'm looking at your gallery and some of what you were saying, I'm starting to get all sorts of ideas for my own use case. And the first one I saw in your gallery was analyzing your Goodreads reading habits, which is... It's one I could do. I don't know if anyone's interested, but I do. So I do definitely have one there. I'm starting to think of all sorts of things. I'm trying to think now of some things I've wanted to visualize on my site that I could use. I'm not a massive Python person, but I have actually the NLP and language. I think now I'm just getting distracted. Here we go.
Well, you are in our target usage sort of because we really it's exactly what Amanda said. We don't want you to have to learn a lot. In fact, the trade-off is with Streamlit, you are going to get less customizability. You are going to get, we're not trying to create a system in which you could build, Twitter or something like that. This is not Ruby on Rails.
But actually, so there's a good point, because this is where one of the ideas I've been having for some time that I'm seeing, you've got NLP here with Spacey or however they pronounce it. And these are some of the ideas I've been having, especially around NLP as someone who's interested in writing and technical writing. But one thing I'm starting to think already in terms of models is, what are your limitations? Because, a data model can often be gigabytes, terabytes in size. So what are your limitations? What are your restrictions to stop me completely abusing the platform?
That's actually a very interesting question. So as a practical matter, if you run Streamlit as an open source project on your laptop or on your cluster, the sky is the limit. You can throw, EC2 mega ultra X8 instance at it. Yeah.
Okay.
If you do it that way, if you provide it on our services, we do have a standard set of compute that we give everyone. Amanda, do you remember what it is?
Oh my goodness, we just changed it, so I'd have to look it up again.
Yeah, so you get a couple of gigs of RAM, and then you're going to get a reasonable processor. And then we have not. One of the requests that we're getting, especially from the ML community, is, of course, I have this huge model. How can I do this in less than 8 gigs of RAM? Or I need mega GPUs and so forth. And I'll tell both your audience and our community, if they're interested, on a case by case basis, we have been upgrading people's compute. But we don't have a good standard process for that, to be honest. And so I think it's one of those things where actually we look at it and we say, maybe there's a business here. It's a very reasonable request. We want to make sure that not only simpler workflows, but really beautiful machine learning, demos and stuff are run super smoothly on Streamlit. So right now it's a case by case basis. We'll upgrade people's compute. And then again, if you want to run it on your computer, there's no technical limit there. It's just,
and that's similar with the GitHub process. I could opt into whether I host it with you or myself. Or
that's right. Yeah. So we don't. It at the core of Streamlit is a true open source project. 100%. What's the license again? Apache 2. Do you remember, Amanda?
Oh my goodness.
Anyway, I know. Me too. It's one of the most permissive licenses. Anyway, the point is,
police are coming to get you as well, by the sound.
Yeah, I know. Let me double check, because the fact police, I would be very sad if they come to get us. Apache 2, yeah.
Apache 2, yeah.
So anyway, that's one of the most permissive licenses, and so it lets you do basically anything. You can use it. When we see companies like Uber use Streamlit, they're actually not paying us. They're just using the open source software, and they're building it into a whole infrastructure that they have. And for us, that's great. We think that the open source project should and must exist in this world, and we are 100% committed to supporting it and developing it, and a huge amount of effort goes into that.
So actually, I've still got this question I've had in my mind at the back of my head for a while, but I think we're slowly answering it. Because one of your announcements is 35 billion Series B.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I've worked with a lot of open source companies, and I kind of know sort of how this goes. But yeah, how are you planning to monetize then? Because so far it sounds like you're giving a lot of it away, which we know can take you so far. And so what's the plan for that? Or what are you doing that you intend to expand?
Amanda, you want to take this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, one of the great things about Streamlit is there is this very clear workflow, right? Where there's the building part of the app, and that's what the open source project does for you. And we're continuing to add to the library. We just added theming, programmable states coming. Like, we're putting a lot of investment into making this a fantastic library, so you can build any type of app, right, that you want with Streamlit. But once you build that app, it was just like I was saying before, right? It's stuck on your laptop, right? You need to get it kind of into this deployed state. And so Streamlit Sharing offers that for free, because we believe that's the right thing to do for the community, right? When you have developed a new NLP model, or a COVID dashboard, right, you want to share with the world, there should be an easy and free way to do that. But companies need that in a secure, right, environment. They need to lock that down to a certain set of viewers, have the data go through certain pipelines. That's what we offer as a paid service.
Right.
So we call that Streamlit for Teams. We've been in beta for a bit with a number of companies, and we're expanding that. So if you've been waiting, if you're on the line and you're like, where is my invite? I can tell you it's coming soon. We're sending out a lot more emails to kind of let you know exactly where you kind of are on the wait list. But we're really looking forward to expanding that a lot this year in terms of access to companies.
So basically, if what you're doing is open source and your data is open, and you don't really care if people are seeing it or changing it through standard kind of version control models, you probably don't need to pay. If you want control, then you probably do. And I guess you can go down a kind of a Netlify model here as well. And actually now I was going somewhere with that, and I've lost my train of thought. But, initially they gave a lot away, but they're doing pretty well by adding lots of things on top that enough people need. I suppose. Okay, cool. And then this was going to be the question I've had at the back of my mind for a while, but now you've kind of already explained that the core is open source. It's kind of answering it. So I think I might rephrase it. in that the Python ecosystem for this kind of data processing, data visualization is pretty broad and pretty mature. So what does Streamlit, what did you add that didn't exist before, I guess, in that ecosystem?
It was very mature on the data processing side. And, there was actually an amazing wealth of visualization. If you were wanting to work in a notebook, for example, which was the exploration side. But our observation was that the next step in the workflow was actually, you kind of fell off a cliff, which was now I want to, let's say you and I have sent me some requests and I've done some processing in a notebook 6 times. And all of a sudden this is starting to become a process in the company, something that we have to do over and over again, something that other people need to be able to see without typing Python code in a notebook. How does that work? And this is a problem that I saw at Google. We saw it at Zoox building self-driving cars. It happens every single time. And it was just really remarkably it was hard. You could hire a team to build an app, and then, that was actually, you get a great app. But then all of a sudden it becomes part of the IP of the company, but it's very slow iteration cycles. It's actually very expensive. Or the data scientists, if it was really like a critical need, they'd be like, okay, I'm just going to create some Flask thing, and you can change the URL parameters and just going to pop some HTML. That was really the state of the art. And I think so in that gap, we just came out and said, hey, you know what? There's actually a class of apps here. There's a class of communication there's a workflow here that's just, it doesn't need to be this hard. If you know Python, if you're a data scientist, you already know 99. If you know Jupyter, you already know 99% of what you need to know. So here's a way of bringing that all together and creating something that's really valuable to the whole company. And that I think that we have kind of crystallized that workflow. And the proof is in the pudding. I mean, Streamlit apps are going to be used by tens of thousands of data scientists today, and they're viewed millions of times. So there's a huge gap there. In other words, our user community is building things which are very valuable for the broader world, and it just keeps growing. So that I think is the problem that we saw and that we really got in front of.
Okay. And I mean, you said it's under an Apache license. It is on GitHub or GitLab or somewhere. Yeah, because it's strange. I don't see a link anywhere, but I guess I could find it.
Yeah, it's on. I think it's github.com/streamlit/streamlit.
I'll take your word for it. I don't know. It's sort of strangely hidden on the website, but that's
we've redesigned it, but it's down in the very bottom. If you go look at the footnote, there's a GitHub link down there.
My cookie pop-up was in the way.
There it is. Yeah.
There you go. That's happened to me many times. And I see. And is there much of a community outside of you working on the library?
Yeah. So that's an interesting issue right now, which is that we are getting more and more, and at this point, sort of a lot of pull requests from the community. And as that's both super exciting, and we want to basically, we want to find a way to supercharge development with community involvement. But also, we also have a roadmap, and we have a lot of, ways that we do testing and code reviews and so forth. And so, actually, an interesting problem that we're thinking about in the company right now is how can we basically take this groundswell of community excitement to contribute to Streamlit and channel it into a rational, hyper-fast development cycle. So I was just speaking with the CEO, the former CEO and founder of Docker yesterday, and we were talking about Solomon Hykes. We were talking about how do you channel the energy of a community into a commercial open source product. It's a super interesting question.
It's a common problem many have, and they're an interesting example in that Docker is almost a synonymous word for containers, and yet Docker is a company. struggled a lot to monetize.
Yeah.
Everyone knows what Docker is, but who uses Docker, the company?
Yeah.
And that's often a problem. And I've worked at a lot of open source companies where you end up being your biggest competition if you're trying to monetize and things like that, which is another whole other problem. Though that's probably a bigger discussion. I guess the more interesting question is, how does the company balance the community ideas and contributions with your own roadmap? I mean, have there been many cases where something has come from the community that you think is amazing, or the opposite, you've had to kind of say, well, this is great, but it doesn't really suit the vision, that kind of thing?
Do you want to go ahead with this, Amanda?
Yeah, I think, you can check our release notes, and quite often in our release notes, we say, thank you to someone, for this or that. We also have a whole components platform that allows people to kind of, take arbitrary JavaScript and put it into something that can be used. And so we have a lot of community contributions there. I think that we also have a group of creators, which is kind of named individuals who add a lot of insight into the roadmap and kind of a lot of extra help in doing these things. So a lot of really fantastic contributions have come from that. I think that sometimes, one of the harder things is that, we're producing regularly, and releasing every couple of weeks, but we're also working on bigger things, like, for example, state, right, or theming, were things that were in the works for a long time. Yeah. And so you'll see some people who, if you're not inside the company, you might not know exactly what's going on with that. And so you may try to introduce a change that's actually going to break, right, when we introduce this new concept. And so that's been something that we're still working on with, like, how can we give more insight to the community about what's coming, right? So both so that they can contribute and be a part of it, but also so that we don't, have a situation that would be frustrating for them where they put in a bunch of time thinking about something and then we're like, that's great, but next release it's going to break. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. So let's just, we looked at the sharing, the funding round, which is actually pretty significant as well. How old is the company? You said 10 years or?
2 years.
Oh, 2 years. Okay. That's it's pretty good then. And the theming. So you've mentioned this theming a few times. Is that something I do in code or somewhere else, or how does that work?
Yeah. Adrien, do you want to explain how theming works?
Sure. So basically, it's done in code because we're a code-first company. But you can also do previews live, and then it'll sort of write the code for you. So best of both worlds. You get all the power of GitHub and all the fun stuff. The other thing that I think is neat is that we really put a lot of effort into always the goal is to not have there be sharp edges, to have the whole experience be magical from end to end. So for example, if you set a primary and secondary color in our theme, we will do our best to actually transfer that color into the plotting libraries that you're using. Yeah. Be it, if you're using Altair for plotting, we can actually pipe that in. And so you may not even realize that we're doing all this work for you. It's just, but that's the goal. A lot of times I think especially with programming technologies, the deeper you get into it, the more you realize there's all these sharp edges. And I think one of the really secrets of Streamlit success is that the deeper you get into it, the more you're like, oh, okay, this is actually really cool. It's cool.
And that happens rarely, so that's nice to hear. All right, 2 final questions. One, just as a project that obviously gets a lot of people putting things into it and doing crazy things with it. What's been one of the creations you've seen that surprised you the most, or made you just amazed that someone did that?
That's a good question.
I think there's like really technically complex things that people do where we're always kind of like, wow, we didn't even know, right, you could do that. I would say the most fun one I saw last week was somebody had taken a whole bunch of data from Star Trek. And you could go and you could look and see like the relationships between characters across episodes and like how much they discussed and things. And as a big Star Trek nerd, I was like going in there and being like, can we figure out the relationship between, like Riker and, by like plotting it over time. And so, there's a lot of creativity there in the community.
Surely it should have been Star Wars in the past week. But anyway, it's fantastic. And what's on the roadmap? What's happening in the next 6 months?
So the big thing that's on the roadmap is the release of Streamlit for Teams, or the coming out of beta for Streamlit for Teams. So that is, on the one hand, it's you might say it's less glamorous than some of the automatic webcam support into your real-time computer vision model, cool demo style work. But on the other hand, it's tremendously exciting for us to see Streamlit become embedded into the workflow of big companies and actually watch decisions get made based on Streamlit apps. And in some cases, we were talking with 7-Eleven, and they said Streamlit has changed the way we hire for our data science team. We no longer hire UI engineers as a separate category. It's just data scientists. It's turtles all the way down, because it's we've essentially Streamlit has changed the structure of their organization, obviously.
Yeah.
On huge companies. That's really exciting to us.
And UI engineers know who to contact. No, that's
I hope your audience doesn't have any UI engineers in it. I hope.
So thanks very much for your time. Actually, I have another stream I do where I get hands-on with the technology, and I think I'm going to add you to the list because I really want to try some ideas. Actually,
yay! That's so cool.
I should have done it before this one. It's nice that there's one that I can without having to sign up and things like that, I guess. So if anyone's interested, that's streamlit.io. And just in case anyone's confused by my pronunciation, that's streamlit.io. And yeah, Adrien and Amanda, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Chris. It's been wonderful.
Thanks so much. Super fun.